Support for the Brülosophy Podcast comes from the following. The best beer requires the best hops, which Yakima Valley Hops provides fresh from the source to brewers around the world. Find everything from classics to modern favorites, as well as cool experimental varieties and a vast array of ingredients and gear at yakimavalleyhops.com. Love to Brew is a national leader in homebrewing supplies, offering exclusive products such as East Coast yeast, TV taps, and Brülosophy recipe kits, all with free shipping on orders over $75. When you need brewing ingredients or equipment, check out Love to Brew at love2brew.com. What is up, everybody? Thank you so much for joining us on this, the first real episode of the Brülosophy Podcast. I'm your host, Marshall Schott, and today we're going to be talking about a topic that's near and dear to my little heart because it was the variable that kickstarted the whole experiment series, Kettle Trub. Joining me today is my good friend and fellow Brülosophy contributor, Malcolm Frazer. How you doing, man?
Excellent, man.
How's the weather out there in Pittsburgh? It looks like some people are getting snow. We had 80 degrees here.
Pittsburgh's great because if you don't like the weather, wait a minute.
Is it really that bipolar, really?
Yeah, last week it was shorts weather, like 70 degrees, and then it was snowing a couple days ago, on Friday, and I was cooking outside on my grill with snow covered on top of the lid.
Jeez, man. I noticed, I saw some people who were, I think they live in the South, Nashville or something like that, snow on the ground today, and oh man, this winter's just been so weird for the whole entire U.S. Well, hey, dude, how you feeling about this whole podcast thing? It's kind of weird. I know you and I've spent a ton of time working on the audio and stuff. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's I don't know. It's I'm loaded with anticipation. I'm nervous, but it's a good nervous energy. There's a lot of good podcasts out there, and
they're not as do you think they're going to be as tremendous or as bigly good as this one?
Bigly. Yeah, I'll reserve comment.
Yeah.
I think we could do some good things, but there's a lot of podcasts out there I like.
Yeah, I'm excited too, man. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. Hey, how's the new baby, dude?
We don't sleep much. Well, my wife more than me.
for people who might be listening who don't know, Malcolm and I are 3 hours apart from each other. I'm over here in sunny, warm California, while he's sitting in chilly, cold, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, with a newborn at right. Almost 10 o'clock at night, recording this episode. So the sacrifices we make, right?
Well, that's more of a tribute to my wife.
No joke, dude. Yeah, way to go, Kim.
That's right.
All right. Well, before we get to the topic of the show, I want to go over a few things first. Thank you so much for all of the feedback in response to our announcement show, that short little teaser that we sent out a few weeks ago. We got a bunch of subscribers. If you haven't subscribed yet, please go and do that. And we got a ton of feedback, some good suggestions and stuff that I figured I'd go over some of the more popular comments that people made. First off, the comments that people made about our recording quality. It sounds like people were pretty pleased with the way this thing ended up sounding, which is validating because I feel like we've put so much effort into making it sound good and it's just not there yet. So for those of you who hear a slight echo or who notice the little audible things that just aren't perfect, bear with us. We're going to get there. We're working on it daily at this point.
For example, my nose just bumped the microphone.
That's more an issue with the size of your nose than it is the microphone or audio quality, Malcolm.
It's a strong nose.
Yeah. That's what your parents told you, I'm sure.
That's what I tell myself.
Yeah. So another thing that people were commenting a lot on is that they want the podcast to be about more than just experiments. So for those people who listened to that episode 0, I had mentioned something about going back to the beginning and starting with the very first experiment and then just kind of knocking down all of these experiments for the podcast. But people were saying they want us to talk about more than just that. They want us to go over things like our short and shoddy brew days, which are a lot of fun. They want us to go over some of the weird methods that we do, like harvesting yeast or burst carbonating, stuff like that. So I figured in the spirit of flexibility, that is exactly what we'll do. So we've already got some plans to hit up some of that stuff. So the last thing, and probably the most popular comment that we got in response to the podcast announcement, is that people want us to release more than one episode per month, which is awesome because we want to do that too. But it's going to require something from you guys, and that is we need your help to do this. There are some really simple ways you can support us. Please, first off, go check out brülosophy.com/support. It's a page it goes over all of the simple ways you can support us. For example, you can go bookmark and use our links at places that you shop at, like Amazon, More Beer, Adventures in Homebrewing, basically any other online homebrew shop you're already shopping at. You go, you use our link, we get a small kickback and get to keep bringing you this nerdy stuff that we do. Another way is there's links to become an AHA member or subscribe to Brew Your Own. If you're not already doing that stuff, come on now. Another really interesting and kind of neat, cool way you can support Brülosophy is through this thing called Patreon, which allows you to set up a recurring monthly contribution in exchange for really cool rewards. Stuff like access to unpublished contributor recipes, participation in the private Brew Crew forum. We actually invite you to be a member of the Brew Crew. That's pretty neat. We also have monthly video chats, and you can even design and work with us on your very own experiment. We've got a person who's doing that with us right now. So all kinds of cool stuff. Throw us some support. We'd really appreciate it, and it'll allow us to keep bringing you the content that we do. All right. So we're going to move on to some announcements real quick. Malcolm, do you have anything you want to announce? Is there anything cool going on in your world?
No, just looking forward to HomebrewCon, meeting a bunch of new contributors to the site, who I've met online but not in person, and then of course the readers, and hopefully now the listeners. So I look forward to that. Minneapolis, here we come.
Oh, no kidding, man! Hands down, my favorite event of the year, HomebrewCon.
Absolutely.
Yeah, this will be my third year. Minneapolis is looking like it's going to be quite a fun time with a lot of the people that I've heard of who are going to be going there. I mean, you get so many dorky people in one thing, and we actually start to look cool. You know what I mean?
I just like Minneapolis a lot. It's a great city. It's beautiful. Good vibe. So I like that it's being held there. Me too. I've never been, but I've heard awesome things. So I'm pretty excited about heading down there. HomebrewCon. If you haven't already signed up to go do it now. It's totally worth it. You will not regret spending the money on this event. It's a really fun, awesome, fun time. Malcolm and I will actually be sitting in on a seminar, or I guess what's it called, a round table type of thing with our friends from the Experimental Brewing Podcast, Denny Kahn and Drew Beecham. They've melded together in my mind at this point. So that's... Yeah, I was calling them the lovable chuckleheads, and I think Denny wants to make a shirt, so...
Yeah, I'm sure he does. So we're going to be doing a thing with them. That's going to be a lot of fun. I believe they're going to be recording a live podcast from there. We'll probably be cruising around with a microphone of some sort in our hands as well. So if you are on the fence, allow us to push you over. It's a really killer time. At the time that a lot of people are probably listening to this episode, I will be on an airplane to Australia, which is my lily pad on my way to New Zealand. I'll be going to the New Zealand Homebrewers Conference with people far smarter than me, like Michael Tonsmeyer from American Sour Beers and our friend Gordon Strong, who's perhaps one of the most notable beer judges on earth. They'll be joining me over in New Zealand, in Nelson, New Zealand, to go to the Homebrewers Conference. We'll all be giving keynote talks, and I'll be doing a live experiment data collection. It's going to be a rad time. If you happen to be in the New Zealand area, pop over. It's going to be a lot of fun. You can follow us on Facebook, facebook.com/Brülosophy. We're also on Instagram and Twitter. That'll help you to keep up with everything we're doing. When we come back, we will be diving into the impact differing amounts of Kettle Trub in the fermenter have on beer. Hang tight. We'll be right back. After a long brew day, the last thing I want to do is waste time chilling work, which is why I use cleverly designed immersion chillers from Jaded Brewing. After some bad experiences with counterflow and plate chillers, I began the search for a more efficient chilling solution and discovered Jaded. That was nearly 4 years ago, and to this day, I continue to rely on the King Cobra and the Hydra to chill my wort in record time without the setup or cleaning hassle of other chillers. If you're looking for a way to optimize your brew day, I can't recommend Jaded chillers enough. Go see what they have to offer at jadedbrewing.com and let them know Brülosophy sent you. All right, welcome back to the show. Time to talk about Kettle Trub. What an exciting topic, eh, Malcolm?
Near and dear to my heart.
Yeah. So maybe before we even get into this, what exactly is Kettle Trub anyways? I mean, I think most people know it as the gunky stuff at the bottom of the brew kettle, once they run off their wort. But what is that stuff made of?
Yeah, so I was just, my wife was asking me about what the show's going to be about, and I told her Trub, and she kind of gave me that, like, what? And I was like, yeah, it's that, beer boogers. It's all the stuff that coagulates when you have a good boil and you have the right pH. And that's called the hot break. And then at the end, when you are cooling down, you have the cold break, and it's essentially a mix of different types of fats, so lipids. So you have unsaturated and somewhat saturated long chain fats, and then you also have proteins, and you have some tannins, are polyphenols, and they all exist in different concentrations depending on the source malt and the content of your grist bill. So if you change between wheat or Pilsner malts or American two-row, you have different concentrations depending on that. So yeah, that's what it is.
Yeah. So, and obviously, I don't know if you mentioned this, but it's also all of the hops that you used during your kettle additions.
Yeah, you'll have some amount of hop material too, which is visible. It's usually more of a greenish color, and
right.
Sometimes the brownish color is the fat lipids that become oxidized during the brewing process.
And somewhere along the line, it became accepted, commonly accepted at least, that this stuff, making it into your fermentation vessel, fermenting with the beer, it will be in some way detrimental to that beer.
Yeah, well, a lot of that is carryover, just like a lot of brewing texts from professional texts, and they had reasons, some that may not apply to home brewers, or beer that's quickly consumed, or beer that is not desired to be clear. Because a lot of the reason for separating it, there's a lot of reasons. But if you go read, a professional text such as, let's say, Technology of Brewing and Malting by Kuhns, or a Charlie Bamforth, Michael Lewis book, those books are geared towards production breweries, and they're concerned about reharvesting yeast, and so a lot of that carryover can be detrimental to that. It can be detrimental to filtering because it's like a sludge. So if you're doing a filtering, it can be detrimental to heat exchangers.
So
you don't want to carry it down the lines,
right? So those are like practical downsides to it. They can actually screw up mechanical stuff, right?
Yeah. So that's the mechanical stuff that. Yeah, it may not apply to some homebrewers. I mean, some homebrewers like to mimic professional systems, and that's fine. If that's what's enjoyable to you, awesome. But there's also the flavor instability issue. These fatty acids can become rancid, and they're like a localized point for oxidation. They can contribute to staling. Proteins can collide and combine with phenols, become polyphenol protein complexes, which can cause instability, and it can cause a permanent chill haze. So there's that issue if that concerns you. The text will say about, so I said the clarity, I said that the flavor stability. That's the things that people want to avoid on the homebrew scale. And there's also some concern, and it's mentioned in a lot of lager professional text, that it could interfere with the flavor. There's concern that these products carry over down the line, and that they can, say, for example, you carry a lot of hop material over and you don't want that hop material flavor, that could interact with maybe the malt, the richness and the roundness of the malt.
Right.
And there's concern that, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say the aspects of the argument against Trub, if you will, that makes sense to me are, flavor carryover from hops for example, or the breakdown of certain compounds that are contained from the proteins and the lipids, like you were mentioning. There's parts of that make sense to me. Like if you have an actual substance in a solution, it's bound to impart some sort of a character than compared to if you didn't have that substance in there. But I'll be honest with you, for probably the first 5 or so years of my brewing career, my whole reason for avoiding trub in my fermenter had to do with my fear that it would create a hazier beer.
So
right?
the science says that that's true. You have a greater, doesn't mean it's a certainty. You have a greater chance of having a hazy beer, or especially the chill haze, the polyphenol protein complexes. So there's a greater chance of that occurring, per science on the professional level. So, if that's a concern, maybe it's in a cheap insurance. I don't know.
Yeah, right. Well, what I'll do is I'll go back a little bit and talk about the original experiment, the original Brülosophy experiment that started it all, which at the time I called the Great Trub Experiment. Basically, it was actually inspired by something that happened. I had already invented one of my favorite pale ales that I call Tiny Bottom Pale Ale. My uncle in town really loves that beer and had asked me if I would make him a batch and swap out his commercial kegging equipment with some homebrew stuff so that he could have a full 5 gallons of Tiny Bottom on hand. So I agreed to do it, and I threw together a 10-gallon batch of Tiny Bottom Pale Ale. I had just gotten into brewing these 10-gallon batches. I had kind of like upgraded my system, and so I throw together this 10-gallon batch. And at the end of the boil, I chill the wort, and kind of naturally, I waited maybe about 4 or 5 minutes for the trub to drop out, for the wort to be clear, and then I started racking over to carboys. And I rack over the first half, and I noticed, there's some trub in there. It's kind of hazy and all that, but nothing that bothered me too much. Well, without doing anything else, I just moved the hose over to my next carboy, and as I'm filling it up, I noticed it was crystal clear. There was nothing in there. And so my assumption right off the bat was, I'm going to have one of the, this beer is just going to be awesome. This is the way it's supposed to look. And so I pitched the same amount of yeast into both of these batches of beer, throw them in the same exact fermentation chamber. I've got the probe sandwiched between them. So they're the same. Everything about them is exactly the same, with the exception of the amount of trub. And I started to observe some differences. And the first one was that the batch that had all the trub in it seemed to kick off fermentation way faster, probably about a day before the other one, which was very concerning, right? I didn't know what was going on. So the high trub beer took off faster. And then not only that, it finished, I suppose predictably, it finished about a day and a half, 2 days before the other one as well. Well, I get these two beers all done up, crash them together. I think they finished at around the same final gravity. Put them in kegs. I carbonate them up, and I'm carbonating them in my keezer before I give one of them to my uncle. And as I'm pulling samples of both, I notice that one of them is significantly more clear, to the point of like commercial brightness, while the other one is hazy. And I had fooled myself thinking, oh, that's got to be the one, that was no trub, basically. And so I open up my keezer, and when I look in, sure enough, I see that the sticker that I have on top is the one for the clear beer was the one that had all the trub in it, which was kind of mind-blowing to me.
Things that make you say, huh?
Oh man, you have no idea. And I was so convinced that maybe I had swapped something up, and it was that actually inspired the first experiment. I was this idea that trub could create a faster ferment and a clearer beer, essentially, really kind of stuck with me. And so I designed what became the Great Trub Experiment. And I made up for that experiment. I made a cream ale, did the same exact thing, except rather than just racking one after the other, I actually coaxed. For the high trub batch, I actually used a spoon to scoop it through the valve of my kettle so that one batch just had massive amounts of trub. Probably, if I had to give a number, I would say 6-7 times more trub than the other batch. I mean, it was pretty disgusting. There are pictures that you can look at in the article on brülosophy.com. I brewed up these two beers. I attempted, when they were all done, to be honest, I observed the same exact thing. The one with all the trub kicked off faster. It finished first. And in the end, side by side, it was brighter than the no trub batch. Now, one of the comments that I got after I published those results, which I wasn't able, I did a triangle test, but I didn't do it right. So I'm not going to talk too much about that. But one of the things that people commented on was, well, do you aerate your wort? Which I thought was interesting. I don't. I've never used an oxygen stone. I guess I kind of shake it. I transfer to my carboy with vigor, but I don't use oxygen or anything like that. And some people were saying that because of the stuff that's contained in trub, that it serves sort of like a yeast nutrient, whereas oxygen in a non-truby batch sort of does the same thing. I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. The saturated fats are actually beneficial to yeast budding and on their life cycle, helps them regenerate and create their sterols. So for the yeast wall.
Mm-hmm.
So, and there's more to it than that. Down the line, there's some nutrients in the trub as well. Not just amino acids and the fats. So those things are said to be beneficial for yeast. They actually help kick off fermentation. And there's also the thought. So trub is very interesting in that for every positive, there's a negative, and more or less professional brewers have decided that the negatives of the shelf life stability, flavor stability have outweighed, the positives. So you want some trub, but not too much trub. Well, one of the things they have found is that while it does provide nutrients, it also coats, some of the fats coat the yeast, so it effectively reduces their total surface area and can inhibit budding and regeneration, or inhibit their contact with the wort, so it can retard their metabolism of sugar into ethanol.
Huh.
So there's a wrestling match there. Which one outweighs?
Is that a function of maybe volume of trub that makes it into the fermenter, you think? Like, I haven't actually heard what you're saying right now, which is interesting to me. And it makes me wonder if you can get to the point of, I don't know, some sort of a saturation point of trub in the wort where it won't, there won't be these demonstrable differences between, or perhaps it would have a negative impact on the beer if you have a certain amount. Is it something like that, you think? Or
yeah, so if you read Narcissus and Kuhn's, they more or less say they aim for a certain concentration of trub. So both cold and hot break. And the reason is,
so it's desired then.
Some amount is desired. Yeah, you don't want a sterile wort. In fact, they've shown that a completely clear wort is actually detrimental to yeast health and beer quality. So there's like unfortunately Americans don't like hearing this. Too much of a good thing can be bad, well, theoretically at least, on the homebrew scale versus the commercial scale might be different. And some of these tests, mind you, I kind of want to bring it back to homebrew, is some of these tests are about tasting panels in measurable versus perceivable, right? So it's not everything it comes down to absolutes, right? So what if, this is an argument's sake, what if the issue is shelf stability, because they're a commercial brewery and they want this product to be shelf stable, flavor stable on a shelf, not someone's keezer, for 110 days versus 60 days, right?
It takes you that long to drink a keg of beer, man.
No, exactly. No, so maybe the difference doesn't show up in a homebrew batch. Maybe it does,
And that's something that I think we, meaning Brülosophy, really ought to explore further in maybe a third experiment trial. So what I did is after the Great Trub experiment, about a year later, after kind of honing the triangle test approach that we still do today, I decided that I was going to give it another shot. And what I decided to do was make a Vienna lager. With these types of experiments, I think it's important to make a nice, crisp, easy drinking beer that's not going to hide any flaws, right? Because we want to see if the variables have any impact at all. So I made a nice Vienna lager.
Well, can I argue it there for a second?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Yeah. So I agree that in general, a lot of these things have a better chance of showing up in a Helles, a Vienna lager, a German Pils, a Czech Pils. But we don't do that all the time for a reason. People don't only brew those beers. So it's nice to be able to show that it does or does not show up in an APA or an IPA too. But sorry, go ahead. You use the Vanity Lager because you wanted to give it the best chance.
I agree with you on that. And also, this was 2015. So we're talking almost 2 years ago now, man. And I agree. There are a lot of variables that I think would be even more interesting in more flavorful or characterful beers. But this wasn't one of them. I made a Vienna lager and just basically repeated exactly the same thing as I did before, where I tilted up the front of my kettle when I ran off the first carboy. I even collected like the first quart of wort just to make sure there was absolutely no trub making it into my fermenter. Got that 5.5 gallons and then collected the second 5.5 gallons while scooping that leftover sludgy Kettle Trub into the second fermenter. Pitched the same amount of yeast into both of them. I fermented this one with WLP 810. I didn't want to use a lager yeast. Well, it's a lager yeast, but I fermented it slightly warmer, only because I wanted the beer to be done a little bit quicker. And I observed the same exact things. Sluggish start in the no trub batch, really quick, vigorous fermentation in the high trub batch. And then ultimately in the end, the low trub batch actually finished 2.002 specific gravity points higher than the high trub batch. So, and I gave these things time to finish out, and it just stopped 2 points higher than the batch that had a ton of trub, which, okay, fine. But what I wondered was, we weren't doing the triangle test right on the last one, but would people actually be able to tell a difference in flavor, aroma, or mouthfeel between these beers? If you look at the photos online of these two beers side by side, they're both bright. They're both very clear. I did fine these with gelatin, which is kind of cool because it seems that fining with gelatin does sort of mitigate the haze difference or the clarity difference between the beers. So we're all good there. The beers ended up looking exactly the same. So what I did is I presented these beers to a panel of blind participants. And by blind, I mean, they had no idea what the variable was. They didn't even know what style of beer I was serving them. And they were asked, they had 3 beers sitting in front of them, 2 exactly the same, 1 from the different batch. I believe the single one out was the one from the high trub batch. And they were asked to pick out the one that tasted, smelled, or mouth-felt differently. And and then what we did is we took those results and we ran them through a little calculator, our statistic, and we found that people could not reliably distinguish between these beers. So basically what that means is that not enough people, more than chance, were able to tell the odd beer out, were able to identify what beer was unique, to say that the variable actually had a statistically significant impact. And which could be interpreted as meaning that the presence of Kettle Trub during fermentation isn't necessarily bad and may even improve overall yeast performance, or at least fermentation in general. Because it like I said, now this was 3 observations of mine where high trub seemed to increase fermentation start time, create a more vigorous fermentation, and then ultimately, without fining at least, create a clearer beer. Again, I was stumped because I was expecting these things to taste different all 3 times. And the 2 experiments, and they didn't, which leaves me kind of scratching my head. What in the world is going on here?
Yeah. So the yeast performance thing makes sense, right? The science backs that up. And the clarity thing, which was kind of odd to me, because I think you observed on at least one of the experiments that the more Truby?
Yeah, good Lord.
The more true-filled beer had better clarity on one of them?
It had better clarity all the way around. Even for the second experiment, I was taking towards the end, I was taking the hydrometer samples, and the one that had a lot of trub was, at least to my eyes, did look more clear than the one that had no trub in it. But since I fined both with gelatin in primary before racking them to kegs, they were both bright by the time I was serving them to tasters.
I just looked it up. I think the official word is trubalicious.
Well, so I guess what got me was, going over these results, I'm sitting there wondering what in the world about it caused quicker fermentation. I looked into it and I discovered a lot of the same stuff you were talking about, that there are basically natural, organic, if you will, nutrients that are in that trub that are going to encourage yeast to work harder, basically. And that's cool. I actually appreciate that. The part that still stumps me is what about that makes for clearer beer. And the only kind of hypothesis I guess I could come up with is that it's just more stuff in solution during active fermentation for that yeast to attach onto and drop out. But I don't know. I mean, is there something else you think? Have you heard of any reason why increased trub during fermentation would produce a clearer beer, or what?
So, like I said, the books would suggest, hey, it's probably minerals, it's probably yeast nutrient. And one of the things I wonder is if the trub could have almost like the beechwood aged effect. It has like a surface area where you have more contact with the yeast on the bottom. So, it's complete BS, but I'm backwards trying to find a solution. Like, how can I explain this?
Yeah.
So like you said, there's more stuff in solution. The yeast kind of attach itself to it, and they're like riders, so, I don't really know.
Well, and there's that, the idea behind yeast flocculation is that, as these things continue to work and grow and reproduce, they start to clump together. And part of my thinking is, well, they're going to naturally trap whatever is in between them before they come together, right? And so perhaps there's something about the positive charge of those proteins, which I believe are positively charged, in the wort that attracts that yeast and pulls them out. And I'm sure it's somewhere out there, but I really don't know. And I still think it's super interesting. There was a study that I referenced in the very first Trub experiment that I thought was pretty fascinating. I'm looking at it now, and I'll kind of go over some of the findings. Let's see. Researchers measured the impact of Kettle Trub on levels of isoamyl acetate, which tastes like banana, and ethyl acetate, which is that nail polish remover thing.
Yeah. So presence of Trub is supposed to inhibit the production of some of those negative esters.
Right. And so let's see. So what they found was that the wort with the most amount of Trub, which I kind of did a calculation here, that would be like 10.5 ounces in a 5-gallon batch for a home brewer. That's quite a bit.
Yeah.
That wort produced a beer with significantly lower levels of isoamyl, of banana and nail polish, which is crazy. I mean, not that I would expect low Trub to produce any more or less, but the fact that it was measurably lower, those flavors that I don't particularly find appealing were lower in a high Trub batch, whereas the low Trub, which everybody is, at least traditionally we tend to kind of aim for, had higher amounts of those two compounds. Just mind-blowing to me.
So that goes back to the whole weighing your pros and cons there. A lot of pro brewers have found that they can minimize that with a good yeast pitch and proper aeration and, good wort composition. So they're willing to say, I'll mitigate that with good fermentation, healthy yeast, and I will try to forego the potential shelf stability issue. So that's their thought.
Yeah, right. It's the balance. And I guess the ultimate question is Trub really as bad as it has been made out to be? And that's something that we're going to talk about in a little bit. When we come back, Malcolm and I will be talking about how these results have impacted our perspectives on Kettle Trub, whether we've made any changes to our methods, and what our experience has been since. Stay with us. If, like me, you prefer the simpler side of brewing beer, you have got to check out the Brew Bag, a food-safe fabric filter that allows for mashing of the finest crushed grain without risking the dreaded stuck sparge. I've been recommending these things since I started using them. They are awesome. The Brew Bag offers the only completely reinforced fabric filter for brewing that can be used over 100 times and comes in sizes that fit most mash tuns, or you can even have one custom made. Go check the Brew Bag out at brewinabag.com and be sure to use promo code TBP17 to get 10% off your order of $30 or more. All right, so here we are back talking about Kettle Trub, and now we get to share with you what, if any, changes we've made to our brewing methods as a result of these experiences or these experiments and perhaps other experiences with Kettle Trub. This is one of those ones where, particularly I think as the first experiment that I ever did and published on brülosophy.com. It got, at the time, in my opinion, it got a lot of traction. People seemed to really kind of latch on to this thing. And there are people out there who took the results and, said that it's evidence that they can just pour all of their wort, trub and all, into their fermenters. And of course, that's not our aim. That's not what we're trying to tell people to do. But I'd be lying if I said that I didn't start to apply a little bit of what I learned from this experience. My original, when I had, let's put it this way, before that tiny bottom pale ale batch, my approach was to rack the clearest wort possible to my fermenters. If for no other reason than an appeal to authority, I admit it. I had, everyone was talking about how clear wort leads to clear beer and you won't get off flavors. And so that's what I did. I had done that for every batch. I would design my recipes to be half a gallon more wort than I needed so that there was enough to hold that trub back. So I perform the first trub experiment. And it really was kind of a shifter for me. It made me rethink my approach, and I started not caring so much. Now, that doesn't mean that I started intentionally, scooping trub into my fermenters, but I definitely stopped waiting so long after I chilled my wort to rack it over to the carboy. And it's been that way since December of 2013, I believe, when I brewed this batch, that first batch. And my experience so far has been exactly what I observed in those two experiments. I'm getting really solid fermentations. I don't use pure oxygen, and I've never had an issue with yeast not taking off quickly. And I made like a 1092 Russian Imperial Stout a couple years ago, and made sure very intentionally to get some trub up in there so that when it fermented, it wouldn't have a slow start to fermentation or not finish out. And sure enough, 2 weeks in, that beer was at 1015 finishing gravity. It fermented quick. It did well. And no off flavors to think of. And I have not had an issue with it. So that's where I'm at with the whole Kettle Trub thing. Malcolm, what do you do? What are you up to these days when it comes to Kettle Trub?
Yeah, on certain batches, I just kind of dump it all in. So my kettles just kind of have a lip on them, so it leaves some of it back. And I do a stir whirlpool now, and so I just kind of stir. And then I let it settle, but I don't I'm kind of in between. Like I don't fret over it as much, because like years back, I used to do like the whole let it settle. I would chill it to get maximum cold break, and then if I was doing a lager, mind you, and I would bring over clear wort only into my fermentation for a lager. Because I was so worried about it, like, oh my God, this is going to be horrible if I have hot and cold break material in this fermenter. So I did that like fanatical, and I would like put it in a keg and then rack it over. It was just nuts. So I've definitely loosened up about that. I can't say it's solely because of the experiment, but I think the experiment has made it less. Experiment results have made it less of an issue. And especially on a beer that I plan on consuming. If I'm making a beer for a parties for some friends, I'm like, we're going to crush this keg, So, if I'm making some hoppy pale ale or whatever, and I'm just like, I just don't care. It's going to be hazy. I'm going to hop it to death anyways. So I'm not worried about clarity. I'm not worried about shelf stability. It's going to be held in my keezer. So if some of it comes over, I might do my whirlpool and my chiller in my groundwater here in PA. I get from like boil to pitchable temperatures within like 10-15 minutes. And yeah, I carry some over and I don't worry about it. And I figure I'll just rack off of it after fermentation. I just don't care.
Yeah, worst case scenario, you leave it behind in the fermenter. I brew a lot of lager beer, and I do it very unconventionally, and some people love that, and some people really do not love that. But when it comes to fermenting lager at traditional lager temperatures, which I'm not doing so much these days anymore, though I do have a Vienna lager on tap right now that I fermented at 48 degrees for a couple of weeks. To me, it almost seems like you want to do everything you can to encourage that yeast to start kicking butt right off the bat, right? Like What the last thing I want to do is have that wort sitting around at 48 to 52 degrees, not doing anything in my chamber.
Yeah, that's the danger zone, right? You know, like if you're ever worked in food service during your life, like high school, whatever, you go to that food service class. So when you're in that danger zone for brewing, which is as soon as you start chilling and until fermentation starts, you know. Now, to me, the idea of holding wort, even in a whirlpool for an extended period of time, just bothers me. You know, I want the yeast to start working. I want to start lowering the pH. I want to start removing that oxygen. You know, so the idea of racking to a separate vessel and chilling it to get rid of cold break and then going to fermentation, it's like which one's more important here? You know, so to me, I'd rather get the fermentation going.
Yeah. Oh God, me too. And I'll tell you what, the other factor for me, and maybe this is just personal, but I am so impatient and I want to make sure that fermentation is kicking like crazy as quickly as possible. And to me, if I can, pitch a Munich Helles at 48 degrees with a little bit of Trub in there and it starts fermenting in 12 hours as opposed to 24, that to me is a win. And particularly, like you said, that 5 gallons of beer is going to be gone. I guarantee that 5 gallons, even if it's all just for me, I'll admit it, that 5 gallons is not going to be around for longer than 4 weeks once it gets in the keg.
Yeah.
I guess the struggle that I see with the fear of Trub, Kettle Trub making it into the fermenter, is what harm does it do? And we're not concerned about shelf stability, like you said, and we are concerned about quick turnaround. At least I am. So
I would like to do. We've talked about this offline in amongst our groups, and I think with some of the readers and such. I would like to do a Trub experiment in which we warm store and try it when it's ready, meaning quick condition, burst conditioned. So, a couple days after getting to the keg, and then the same thing, maybe 2 or 3 or 4 weeks down the line, and maybe 3-4 months down the line. I would like to see if the delta starts to increase. I think that has merit both for the science and for the people, setting people's minds at ease. Because something I talk about a lot is the measurable versus the perceivable.
Yeah.
I think it stands to reason that most of the time, right off the fermenter into the keg, burst carb, 2 or 3 days later, you can't tell some of these things.
Yeah.
So
that's been my experience as well, and I agree. I think stretching out a Trub experiment where we're actually measuring the stuff that doesn't even really matter to us, at least on a personal level. I would actually like to maybe in a future survey, Malcolm, we can ask people, like, how long do you typically sit on a batch of beer? Because I cannot remember, with the exception of beers that I have made specifically for experiments where the variable involves aging, I honestly can't remember. And I've got 7 kegs. I can't remember having one around for much longer than about 4 or 5 weeks. And it's funny because that's driven our decisions on aging experiments. Oh, we'll collect data once it's 6 weeks old, and people are coming back and saying, understandably, well, that's not long enough. Well, dang, what is long enough? I mean, we sit on it for a year, but then, it loses that pragmatic component.
Well, there's people out there. So there's a few people in my club who are competitive and they sit on beer because they have a lot of kegs, Yeah. So it's pragmatic for those type of people. So I compete, and I have one whole chest freezer full of beer, and I have to put, like, when I brewed it, which batch it was, and I come around and I start tasting some of these kegs, and I'll have like this Pilsner from like a year ago. And as soon as I taste it, now this is complete, confirmation bias BS, but I taste it. I'm like, Jesus, I'm like, what the hell happened to that thing? And I flipped the tag over. I'm like, oh, that's from like last year's competition, Beer and Sweat in Cincinnati, So
did it taste like Beer and Sweat in Cincinnati?
Well, yeah. Well, first of all, I love Cincinnati, but
Cincinnati's great. Skyline chili, by the way.
No, Cincinnati is not great for chili. It's great because of the people and because of their love of baseball, but and they have some good beer.
But yeah, I see what you're saying, that there's, aging does seem to have an impact on certain types of beers, and perhaps the amount of Kettle Trub that is fermented with said beer, it is playing a role in that. Now, wouldn't it be something if after aging these, there did a significant difference was seen, and it just so happened that the Truby batch or the high Trub batch was the one that people preferred because it was cleaner or whatever it may be.
Well, yeah. And, a lot of these studies and these books, and these people are paid a lot of money to write these books, and they're accomplished, scientists and brewers. So there's something there, so it doesn't always extrapolate to home brewers. So I would like to see when that does start to manifest and become significant to us, only for intellectual curiosity,
Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah.
So you got to push the bounds on some of these things, and kind of see like if and when it does apply to us,
Yeah. Well, and that makes some people uncomfortable, I guess, and that's okay. But it doesn't it excites me. It's what keeps me interested in this hobby, I believe.
Yeah.
Another thing I was thinking about Kettle Trub that I think is perhaps more applicable on the commercial scale is just the fact that it does a very real impact is that it takes up space, and that's space that could be filled with beer that gets sold that ends up keeping these breweries in business. So that makes sense to me.
Even
as well.
if you are a small batch brewer, right? So you only have a 3-gallon carboy if you're using that, or a small.
Oh, great
keg,
point.
Right. So now you have. So I've noticed when I pour off the hot break from my kettle. Well, I guess it's a hot and cold break because it's post chill, but it's about 0.75 to a gallon's worth of sludge.
Yeah.
If I carry that over, that's taking up space, and it's just sitting there. And then when I rack from my fermenter, if I'm using carboys, I have to avoid that. So my racking cane has to go, further up off the bottom, so I carry less over in my fermenter. So, I guess there's applications in which you can say it's beneficial to avoid it.
Yeah, yeah. What if somebody were to come to you and say, "Hey, I know you hate giving recommendations, but what do you recommend I do? I've been brewing for a few months now. I'm seeing, all of this conflicting information out there about Kettle Trub. What do you recommend to the person?"
So this rapper turned beer author, Chuck P., Charlie Papazian, he wrote a book, and one of his quotes was, "Relax, don't worry, have a home brew." And I think a lot of that applies still. Pretty much you can get away with whatever you can get away with, whenever it makes the hobby fun for you, do it.
So the same person says, well, dude, that's not, you're being too vague here. So basically what happened was I brewed this batch and I poured the entire Kettle Trub and all into the fermenter. Is it going to be a bad beer?
No.
Okay, cool.
Probably not. Probably not. Not for that reason.
Yeah, unless you screwed something else up. So my recommendation is similar to yours. If somebody were to come to me and ask about Kettle Trub, my first response would be, try it out for yourself. See for yourself, because it's just beer, first off, and secondly, what's more exciting than nerdy science, right? Go and just split a batch or do 2 in a row or whatever and try it out. But I do absolutely not worry anymore about the amount of Kettle Trub that makes it into my fermenters. But at the same time, I don't intentionally put it in there. So that's where I'm at. I've had what I consider to be a really good track record with my fermentations. And I've never had one. I believe I've had one stalled fermentation, and it was on some weird thing that I did. I'm not even sure it was stalled. Other than that, I'm doing well.
So confessional, for competition beers and beers I really fret over, I still try to avoid bringing the mass of hot and cold break over. I don't make extreme measures to avoid it, but I do leave a bulk of it behind, and that's just because I kind of lean that way a little bit more when it comes to very delicate beers.
Well, yeah, and that's the cool thing is that science isn't, at least when it comes to brewing science, and this is my opinion, but it's not here to tell you what to do or how you should do things, but it's here to inform your decision making. And you can take it or leave it. The beautiful thing is, for years, people have been making delicious, wonderful beers without Trub. It just so happens that nowadays, with a little bit more understanding, it seems a lot of people are making equally as delicious beers that are being made with a lot of Trub.
Right on.
All right, everybody. Well, that brings us to the end of the first show. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope it was as good for you as it was for us. Don't forget to check out the support page at brülosophy.com for ways you can help us to bring you more content. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter to keep up with what we're doing. Please send show feedback to marshall@brülosophy.com. Cheers to all of our sponsors, and thanks to my friend Mark Gadgetar, also known as Gadgamagic, for providing most of the music for this podcast. We'll be back in a few weeks with the next episode of the Brülosophy Podcast. Until then, think beer.
Start off the morning with some hot tea, lemon and honey cause it soothes my throat. Put some herb in the bowl, yeah, it's homegrown. Ain't gotta go through the middleman no more.